if you are to become governor, okay, you're going to battle the system. Everybody thinks that, well, a lot of people think, I don't think everybody, but everybody thinks that Boston has to have one of everything, or has to control, has to be the hub. And yet you look around the state and the imbalance that is being created, that big sucking sound is Boston, okay, or even, like we've said over here, mass development, which is, they've done a great thing down at Devon's when the Army pulled out. But that's the only places where industries are being settled, okay, and they're giving, you know, the citing of the permits is putting on the fast track, okay. Lowell's lost a lot of jobs. Springfield's lost a lot of jobs. Worcester's lost a lot of jobs because they create these zones and then they wonder why people aren't working in the cities. And you look at all that space out in the Berkshires, I think sometimes, at some point, someone's got to connect the dots and say, wait, we've got an attractive state. But look at the glut you're creating, the extra transportation costs. You know, we had the big dig. It hasn't stopped anybody from getting into Boston a lot sooner. One breakdown brings everything to a halt. 2 inches of snow, it's like Washington, okay? So I think, you know, if we're going to be creative and smart about growth, okay, why don't we start citing some of these places, these companies, these schools, okay, in different areas where, that's why I agree, you know, let them put let them put a casino down there in Fall River. Who's going to Fall River? Who's going to New Bedford? I don't see any whalers coming in anymore, you know, so what are they going to do? You know, what are those places going to do? So I think that those are the decisions, the tough decisions that have to be made for leadership in this state and saying, you know what, maybe it's better that Pittsfield has this or Taunton has that because, you know, it's uneven. And that's
well, I
the
do
problem.
think, I mean, one of the things I've said about economic development is that rather than picking sectors or companies, which is what we've been doing with a lot of our economic development activity, you know, we're going to invest in, the state's going to invest its money in this sector or this company. And I think the poster child around that's probably Evergreen Solar. We should be building regional economic development plans and basically saying, what do you want to do in the Merrimack Valley? What do you want to do in Essex County? What do you want to do in the Berkshires? What are the things, because when I travel around, there are, and I thought this was true when I was at Harvard Pilgrim, when I was just out visiting my customers. There are certain industries that actually have footprints in different parts of Massachusetts, and we should be trying to leverage the footprints we already have in those different places rather than trying to sort of pick some sector and say that's what we're going to invest in. And I actually think the state started heading down this road a few years ago and then walked away from it, and I never understood why, because it always seemed to me that, you know, to sort of simplify the way you described it, there's inside 128, there's outside 128. But even outside 128, there's a lot of different economies. I mean, if you go down to Fall River and New Bedford, fishing is a big piece of the drill down there. And they're involved in a huge food fight with the federal government right now over catch share versus days at sea versus, you know, what the appropriate level of the catch ought to be and all that. And NOAA just appointed this guy to run, the president just appointed this guy to run NOAA, who, you know, doesn't appear to have any background to speak of in this space at all. And they had a perfectly qualified guy in Brian Rothschild, who's down at UMass Dartmouth, their marine science group, who would have been terrific, and he didn't get the job. So I agree with you on that one.
Well, the thing is, it seems you know, education is making a lot of progress. It's certainly getting a lot more of our budget money, although some people say it's not enough because of the imbalance with health care and you know pensions. But right now, in our area, after we lost Wayne, there was really nothing. You know, when Wayne went out, Wayne had, you know, supplied 12,000 jobs in Lowell. And all this, these venture capitalists that we thought, you saw an incubator plant up at Wanalins at Mills, we had Kanaka. But Kanaka, when they got to that development stage to where they were going to actually make something, they found their workers out the Fall River. Now some people, you know, I would have loved to have seen that stay in Lowell, and I said they'd probably sleep at the switch, the DPD in our own town, because they didn't keep those jobs here, and yet we have enough vacant buildings. But, you know, the college right now, that's a generator of jobs. And also in some of these other areas, Amherst. I mean, I imagine that the university system is a
big footprint.
Yeah,
and that's not the only one. I mean, you also got Hampshire and Amherst College out there too.
Yeah,
they've got 3 big schools out there.
So unless we make Massachusetts more attractive to attract outside businesses. Okay, we've got governors from other states coming in here. Janet Granholm from Michigan, she came in here and took three companies that are on the verge of expanding, right from under our noses. She got them to go to Michigan. Others have gone to North Carolina. Why is that happening?
I think part of it is we don't choose to be as aggressive or as focused on competing for employment as we should be. I mean, when I go out and visit companies, and I talk to a lot of them, the stories they tell are not that different. I mean, they basically talk about the fact that regulatory policy here changes on a whim. So, you can't bank on regulatory policy remaining, staying sort of stable and predictable over time. Tax policy, same thing. We've changed corporate tax policy 7 times in the last 4 years. If you're an S corporation or an LLC, which a lot of small businesses are, we've changed that. We change tax policy and reporting requirements on S corporations and LLCs sometimes more than once a year. The fiscal stuff, as long as the fiscal piece appears to be sort of unsolved and unmanaged, that's going to splash back on people's decision making. I mean, when you talk to most of the people I've talked to, the biggest single reason they hesitate to invest is uncertainty. So if you don't create some predictability and reliability for them, we're always going to face this problem. And we don't treat this anywhere near as seriously as we should. You go out and you visit some of these manufacturers, okay, and they'll say point blank, I got a whole, here's my assembly shop. Here's where we manufacture what we manufacture. This, and this don't qualify for the sales and use tax exemption for manufacturing mass. I don't know why. They're all part of my manufacturing process. Or the rags that I buy to wipe off my equipment, if I use some of those to wipe off the stuff in my office, some auditor comes around and makes me pay sales taxes on the rags that I use to wipe off the equipment in my office. You go talk to some guy in Fall River, who I talked to down there, employs a lot of people, basically in a position to probably double his footprint down there. He's got a lot of jobs already. And he said, every time the state comes in here to audit me, it's, the rules are different, the standards are different, there's no objective standard from time to time, every time I pay a fine. Meanwhile, I got other states that are throwing money at me to go. I'd rather stay, but I really wonder about whether or not the state's going to be a serious partner with respect to my ability to grow and create jobs. The gateway city stuff, I mean, we've been kicking around the idea of creating tax credits for historical development of old properties in gateway communities now for 3 or 4 years. Haven't been able to get that enacted. That's probably as important to places like some of the places you were naming as anything. And I think, I actually think for a lot of those middle cities, we probably ought to have a focused relationship between the state and those middle cities, where those middle cities, instead of having to call 10 different agencies to get anything done, they can actually, we always talk about wanting to create a single point of inflection for businesses that are looking to expand in Massachusetts.
Val Patrick ran on it.
Well, I would make an argument that we should be thinking about creating a single point of contact for middle cities. We've got a lot of middle cities in Massachusetts that could really use a focused effort applied to some of their issues and their concerns, because many of them have got serious issues, but at the same time, serious possibilities if you could get the focus applied to them.
Well, we wrote a story several years ago about how there's a pharmaceutical company ended up going to Devon's. At the same time that Mass Development was wooing them, the town of Billerica, unbeknownst to them, that Mass Development was undercutting them, okay, they had a piece of land, they were negotiating with this company, trying to get them to go to Billerica. They didn't know that Mass Development was being their competitor. At the same time, they invested a lot of time, effort into trying to come here, and every time they get something better, they'd go back to Mass Development and they'd beat it.
Yeah.
So they were competing against a town.
Bristol Myers.
Was it Bristol Myers?
Yeah.
Bristol
Myers, I remember that.
Yeah. And it just seemed odd, and when everything came out at the end, Billerica finds out they were competing against Mass Development. Say, wait a minute, are we all in this together?
We should be.
Shouldn't the state have been behind us, or we could have just said, hey, all right, good, they're gonna go down there, but it was like no one was on the same page, and you just wonder, who's connecting the dots? Who's connecting the
No, I
dots?
know. But I do think that, over and over again, I hear this thing about consistency, whether it's regs, taxes, fiscal. consistency. There's no consistency month after month, time after time. If you're not consistent year over year, if the rules of the game are constantly in a state of flux, it's really hard for people to make the big scale decision. And what shows up in the data is, we still generate a ton of patents, we still generate a ton of startups, but when you get into employment associated with those patents and those startups, we fall literally out of the top 2 or 3 in the country, and sometimes even out of the top 10 and the top 20. And I've talked to a lot of these
Well,
companies.
Capuano was here a few months ago when he was running for Senate. He said you can't do it. You can't keep employment here. You have to rely on the startup. You have to rely on emerging technologies and things like that, and then you lose the workers to
cheaper areas.
overseas.
Yeah, and I don't buy it.
He's given up.
No, I don't buy that, and I'll tell you why I don't buy that. There are 260,000 people who work in manufacturing in Massachusetts, all right? That's more than work in tourism, it's more than work in professional services, it's more than work in finance, all right? So for all the talk about how you can't make anything in Massachusetts anymore, it still represents, it's fourth behind healthcare, education, and retail. Manufacturing is fourth, 260,000 people. Now, what they're not is, the old city block assembly line. The big scale, manufacturers, those for the most part have trouble staying here. But we have a ton of and that's who I've been visiting, a ton of these companies that employ anywhere from 25 to 500 people. They do something that's unique. They like the educated workforce. They like the fact that they can play in a space that has a proprietary process in many cases. They're not making 12,000 widgets. What they're making are 45 versions of 15 widgets, okay, where you need a highly trained workforce to be able to do it and all the rest. And Massachusetts has a lot of that. And they get a pretty decent price on their products, and most of them are family owned or privately held, and they're succeeding. And they're the ones that over and over again said to me, look, you just clean up the regulatory and the tax and the fiscal stuff. Give us some degree of predictability, and we can figure out how to add jobs and create more jobs here. And they're like forgotten. It's like they don't even exist. People say, well, guess what, guys? They employ more people than a lot of other sectors of this economy that everybody thinks of as being, sort of the bread and butter of the future. I don't buy it.
How would you make it more consistent, huh? What would you do?
Well, the tax piece, I think, is just a function of will. You basically have to just take the position that we're not going to screw around with our tax policy every time, state government runs into a financial problem. I mean, the latest example is probably the film tax credit. You doubled down on it 2 years ago, made a really big deal out of it, press conferences, balloons, banners and all the rest, and 2 years later, times are tough, so let's cut it in half.
How do you get
You can't play that game.
How do you get the support from the legislature?
I don't think the legislature chooses to raise taxes every time the state gets into trouble. I mean, Governor Patrick sort of put that one on the table when he proposed a whole series of tax increases over the last couple of years. I mean, the corporate tax changes 2 years ago, well, 3 years ago now, I guess, depending upon how you do the math, that was his change. Last year, he didn't propose the sales tax, but he basically put a whole series of other tax increases on the table. And he proposed a whole bunch of tax increases in his budget this year, all of which basically says to the legislature and everybody else, taxes are on the table and part of the discussion. I think taxes shouldn't be on the table. We shouldn't be raising taxes. Not when we're as economically challenged and economically uncompetitive as we are here. You just shouldn't be doing it. And the regulatory stuff, I don't need the legislature to help with. On that one, you just have to take basically take a position that says, we're not going to continue to constantly modify, update, change, rearrange, rework, and reorganize our reg policy just because it keeps people busy, which is what we end up doing a lot of the time around here. I think the whole regulatory thing needs a top-to-bottom overhaul, start to finish.
Are you saying it's a mistake to make the sort of targeted investments in solar, wind, sort of renewable energies and life sciences that the state has? I mean,
Well, I was glad to see the
$1 billion
state.
in life sciences.
I was glad to see the state put the procurement out on the renewable energy piece. I was worried that we were heading down the path of sort of picking a preferred solution on that one. But they did decide a while back to put out an RFP. I think the proposals are due this week. on the renewable energy stuff, which I think is good. I don't think it was good that the state appeared to be making selections, you know, wind is good, you know,
Yeah.
this is bad, this is biomass is bad, this is, I mean, no. Let's give people a chance to make proposals and see what they say. The life sciences piece, I talked to a lot of people in the life science field, and they've said to me that the rules and the criteria that are associated with accessing that money are complicated enough that it's really not even worth it to them to chase it at this point. So, and I generally speaking would prefer to take the position that says if you have reliable and predictable and accountable policy on regulatory, tax, and fiscal, and you work on developing your economic development plans on a regional basis, then where you would choose to invest and how you would choose to invest would come out of those types of proposals and initiatives, and that would be, from my point of view, a better way than doing it than just sort of saying, you know, we're going to make a big bet on this sector here. Because you do end up in situations where geographically, you know, you can create gridlock for yourself.
The way you see it right now, is it a problem of leadership? Is that what this, I mean, it seems like Massachusetts has the foundation in a lot of these different areas. I mean, we still remain very, very competitive in developing things.
We are a great place. We are smart and creative and innovative. There's no question about that. And that's why you still have a fair amount of venture money here and a ton of activity going on in the patent space. Yes, we are absolutely perfectly capable of coming up with the next new thing, whatever that happens to be. But we don't create a climate or environment in which that next new thing scales here. And we haven't for a while. And I think to take the position that, you know, we can't, I don't buy that, that's for sure. I mean, if you go, and I would argue that's an inside 128 view, right? You get outside 128, land's not that expensive, all right? It's really expensive inside 128. It's less expensive between 128 and 495, and outside 495, you know, our price of land can compete with anybody's. What we have is a really difficult permitting process and licensing, and in some cases, certification process. If we're really, I mean, those are types of things we should be able to solve on our own and create opportunities for people.
It's not the price of land so much as, I mean, Evergreen Solar shipped all its manufacturing jobs to China because they don't have to pay employees wages, right? I mean, that wasn't
that's a
about
good
getting
example.
space in Devon's or the permits.
No, but that's a good example of a company we made a huge bet in.
Yeah.
Huge. In an industry that, you know, in retrospect, most of the people I talked to said, well, yeah, of course it's going to scale. And at some point when it scales, it's going to commoditize. And once it commoditizes, it's not going to be something you're going to be able to make here. You know, I mean, the companies that I've been visiting haven't been in business for like 3 weeks. They've been in business for like 20 or 30 years, okay? And they've managed to constantly morph whatever it is they brought to the table from one industry to another as that became Pittsfield. Pittsfield has 25 plastics manufacturing and fabrication companies. You know, when GE Plastics closed out there, everybody sort of thought plastics was gone, right? It's not gone. It's operating in all these little industrial parks all over the place out there, and they employ anywhere from 25 to 200 people, depending upon the company you go to. They're privately held for the most part. It's the scientists and engineers who used to work for GE Plastics who had an idea about something that might work, and you go talk to these guys, and 15 years ago, their primary customers were in photography. Now their primary customers are in healthcare. And it's just the ability to morph and change that skill set that they've got to meet a new demand of the next industry. And I think the thing that's made them successful is they recognize that their great differentiator is the fact that they don't have to be the market leader in some field that is huge, right? What they want to be is a market leader in a not so big field that somebody doesn't necessarily want to have to make 5 million units of to be successful. And I think, and what those guys need more than anything is just a business climate that they can count on. And they'll grow. I mean, at Harvard Pilgrim, one of the biggest lessons I learned was if you want more customers, do a good job with your existing ones, and they become your ambassadors. You know, I had a guy literally say to me, I was talking to one of my suppliers, and he was talking about moving to Massachusetts. I told him not to come because the regulatory climate's so difficult. You know,
I told him not to come.
He said because the regulatory environment's too difficult. He said, go to New Hampshire. That to me.
I hope this was before you declared for governor.
What do you mean?
Are you discouraging businesses from coming to Massachusetts?
A business I was talking to, when I was talking to him about the regulatory environment, he said to me that he had talked to one of his suppliers about coming to Massachusetts, and he told his supplier, he said, don't come to
I'm sorry.
Massachusetts.
I thought you said you told.
Oh, no, God, no. I'll tell everybody.
That's what I-
I'll tell anybody to come. But if, the word of mouth stuff here matters. And if the word of mouth is that the state's a difficult partner, then that's what these guys are saying. And the ability to actually bring people here, you got to climb over that hurdle every time. Yeah, go ahead.
Coming from okay, we get back on the healthcare sector. Now, we had a state senator in here earlier this morning, Steve Panagiotakis, and he gave us a little preview of the Senate budget, where he didn't think that they'd be able to keep local aid level funded, like the governor's budget. He said the biggest thing was the drivers being the healthcare costs. Okay, how do you? First of all, do you think our universal health care plan is a success? Okay, it's been used as a model by some people. Other people use it as a model to point to, don't go down that road.
And they're both right.
Yes, okay. Well, I mean,
Depends upon how you define
Steve said
success,
you can't
you know?
sustain the costs, the increases. He says no one can sustain it. The municipalities are going through the same thing with their collective bargaining agreements that they entered into. He says the state says you just can't between 6% and 12% every year. You're just not making the revenue, even during good times. He says you just can't keep it. I mean, I read this piece in the Globe last week. Now, unless they misquoted you, you said one of the first things to do is lay off 5,000 workers. Okay, and then the 17 health and human service agencies you'll consolidate and stuff. But those are just, I think, some of the things you can do, but they're not going to solve the major problems with the rise in health.
No, you need a big list. You need a very big list. They weren't writing a book, they were just writing an article, so I gave them a few.
And then they editorialized that, gee, you guys don't really have the,
Well, Cahill didn't give them anything,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. But they go together,
And
it adds up.
he doesn't think we need to reform our pension system either, which I find bizarre.
But looking at healthcare, what can you do as a governor to basically, after, with your experience, as an executive in the healthcare industry, what could be done?
Well, I think we should start, for 5 years I've been saying that the number one thing we need to do in healthcare is make it transparent. And to me, that means public disclosure around what people get paid and public disclosure around performance. I mean, this is the only industry I can think of where nobody knows anything about how much anything costs or who does a good job. I mean, I can't think of another sector of the economy that's as hidden from public view as this one is, which is surprising to me given how big it is and how important it is and how much people care about it. And I actually think part of the reason the federal reform ended up over a barrel was because they didn't appreciate the fact that all of this stuff going on behind closed doors and off the radar and out of people's sightlines really gave people the heebie-jeebies about what was being done to them or what was going to be done to them. So for me, number one all along has always been public disclosure around price, public disclosure around performance. Now part of the reason I say that is because I know enough about it to know that the same service delivered to the same person with the same outcome by 5 different providers can vary in price by 300%. It's not like there's a 5 or 10 or 15 or 20% variable here. We're talking about a monstrous variable. And the AG actually issued a report on this a couple of weeks ago and said the number one driver of healthcare cost increases, unit price paid on the provider side, and discrepancies between and among providers around what they get paid. So for me, it's got to start there. Secondly, I don't think the administration did a very good job of implementing the merger of the non-group market and the small group market. I said all along, and I'll dig up the articles if you want to see them, that I thought merging the individual market with the small group market, unless it was done very carefully, would increase prices in the small group market. I don't think it was done very carefully, and on top of that, the state added a whole series of new regulations and mandates to what small businesses had to purchase for insurance that drove up the cost of their insurance on top of that. In the old days, 3 years ago, a small business, and many of them did, there were a couple 100,000 people in Massachusetts who had these plans, could buy non-drug coverage products, right? And those were 20-25% less expensive than plan designs that offered full drug coverage. Since you could get 80% of what you needed covered on the prescription side at Walmart for $4 a pop on a generic basis, that didn't seem like such a bad deal to me. Well, people said, the state said, well, what if they need some drug that's not available at Walmart as a generic? And I said, fine, then build a benefit plan that just covers, sort of brand name, tier 2, 3 drugs for certain circumstances, put a high deductible on it, and make that the kind of thing that somebody can buy. And the state said, no, it's got to be comprehensive across the board. Well, for a lot of people, that literally increased overnight the cost of their health insurance by 20% and made them buy something they didn't think they needed. We also, in the process of doing that reform, we eliminated, people had $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 deductibles. Now that may seem like a lot, but to get back to the notion of how do people organize their lives and their businesses, a lot of sole proprietorships and a lot of S corporations, could do that and could afford to carry that kind of risk, and it wouldn't be a problem for them. The state said, no, you can only have a $2,000 deductible, thereby raising, again, making them buy something that many people didn't think there was a lot of value to. We didn't do anything when we merged the individual market with the small group market to deal with the fact that that was going to drive prices up in the small group market to begin with. I think small businesses are paying anywhere from 6 to 25% more for their health insurance than they would have been paying, depending upon what kind of plan they had and how it was organized. So I think that whole thing needs to be redone. On the state's own cost of doing business, I think there was a proposal that was put forward 3 years ago that said that if the state got out of the business of running its own Medicaid program and just contracted out all of it with the 5 entities they were already contracted out with, Neighborhood Health Plan, Health Net, Network Health, Felon Community, and Celtic Care, that the state could save several $100 million. Now, their proposal literally said the state over time could save like $800 million. That's such a big number, I have trouble even wrapping my head around it. Let's suppose it's half right, okay? There was a big opportunity there. The state never pursued it. The administration never did anything with it. I thought for a long time you could save money if you merged there are a whole bunch of people who are eligible for both Medicare and Medicaid. Senior citizens, mostly poor, pretty expensive. Medicare and Medicaid operate like they're not even serving the same population. The way they keep track of stuff is different, their plan designs are different, there's no synchronicity at all between what Medicare covers and what Medicaid covers, and the end result is really expensive, uncoordinated, not good. Several demonstrations have been done, including a couple in Massachusetts, that show that if you put the two programs together, create a single plan design for poor seniors who qualify for both programs, they get a comprehensive coordinated benefit. They're happier, they're healthier, and it costs a lot less than what it costs to have these two programs sort of operating in different universes on behalf of
Did that impact
which should be
reimbursement
replicated.
stuff?
No. But that could be replicated and expanded. I mean, what you really get out of it is care coordination, which for a lot of these folks would be a huge step up from the way they're being treated now. And as far as the local aid thing is concerned, I was the first person to say that I think we should stop cutting local aid. And I said it because I've been out visiting with city and town managers, mayors, selectmen, and school committee people who've done a lot of hard work, the equivalent of what I talked about in there in terms of agency and personnel consolidation. I mean, you talk to some of these folks, they've let go, 25% of whole departments. And they've renegotiated their collective bargaining agreements. Everybody's taken a 5% haircut. There's been far more focus and follow-through on living with the new normal and dealing with the financial reality at the local level than there has been at the state level. So for me, the big issue here is as soon as state government demonstrates that it's living up to the same level of focus and follow-through and dealing with its financial problems that you see coming out of the cities and towns, maybe then we talk about cities and towns again. But on this one, my view is I don't know what happened when the governor filed his budget. I would hope, let's put it this way, if I'd been the governor and I'd filed a budget that said I want to preserve local aid, that day, I would have made phone calls to the Speaker, the Senate President, House Ways and Means Chair, and Senate Ways and Means Chair, and said, I know this is going to be a big lift. I want you to know that my team stands ready to work with you guys to try and figure out how to make this work for cities and towns if that's something you'd like to work on. Now, I have no idea if Steve got a phone call like that. I have no idea if any of them got a phone call like that. But to me, that's how you, if you're really serious about engaging the legislature, which has its own set of issues and problems that I appreciate, recognize, and understand, you got to start by engaging them in that conversation and telling them you're going to be there to help them work through it. Period.
Would you push for the legislature to give towns and cities plan design so that they could change the insurance that's offered to unions, regardless of contracts? That's the same thing the state has.
Yeah.
So that they're able to make differences. They could save millions of dollars.
Yeah, I was thinking that maybe one way to go at that would be to say that unions can bargain the percent contribution, but communities get to determine the plan design.
Mm-hmm. That would be
That's
a
sort of a,
compromise.
well,
Yeah.
that's a thought. I mean, that's, I was thinking that might be a way to try to bridge the gap.
Mm,
But I do think cities and towns need more flexibility.
definitely.
I mean, I was a local official, we had to go from one union to the next just to change our copay from $5 to $10. From $10, yeah, from $5 to $10.
It's which no one pays in the private sector.
Well,
Everyone's
and furthermore, we were also 60-40 from a contribution split, so you'd have to go to the doctor like 70 times to not get back what you would get in the premium savings.
Mhm.
But we literally had to go, and we got 3 or 4 of the unions to agree just like that because they got the math.
Mhm.
But
But you need,
you gotta go to every, and that was ugly, and I don't think that's a particularly effective way of getting stuff done.
not at all.
So my thought was, you let the town figure out the plan design, and then you bargain the contribution strategy.
So you're saying don't cut local aid?
Yeah.
Now, when the senator was in here this morning talking.
But I understand, I totally,
No.
I sympathize with the situation.
I know, and he
you
basically
face.
said, he looked at, take the governor's budget, $125 million in new tax revenue. We're not doing it. Restructuring debt and borrowing money, which the governor
Yeah.
proposed to do, some of those bonds that kind of spiked this year, $300 million
Yeah.
there, and $175 million draw on the rainy day account. He said we need to do one or the other, we can't do both. So take the rainy day account off the table, now you're at like $300 million. If you don't
So
cut
let's start
local
talking,
aid,
let's
what do
start
you-
talking about simplifying the operating model. Dealing with the 120 operating agencies and the 50 independent authorities. I mean, I'm all for what the Senate's trying to do on consolidating the economic development agencies.
Murray's
that
bill,
is-
yeah.
I mean, it just doesn't make any sense the way we've got it organized now. And I would say that's true for a lot of that stuff. And let's talk about pension reform. The pension proposal we made last December would have saved $50 or $60 million a year.
What was that?
You really want me to get into the whole
We love
ugly?
pensions.
You do love pensions? Okay. I basically said, you need to think about this as 2 groups. People with 10 years or more who are vested,
Mhm.
and people with less than 10 years, okay? Less than 10 years, the rules of the game are gonna change, okay? 55 to 60, raise the retirement age. $90,000 cap on what you can take out as a pension. No group jumping, okay? You basically sign up when you join state government, or you sign up right now if you're in state government in the group that you're in. Unless you demonstrate 10 years worth of service in a different group, you can't jump from one to another. And your payment, when you retire, will be based on what you made over the course of your career, adjusted for inflation. No more high 3, no high 5, no high nothing. Because your pension payment ought to be a function of what you paid in, not a function of what you made in the 2 or 3 years when you maxed, okay? Now, if you do that for that group and you leave the 10 and 2 thing in place, they will pay for themselves, okay, with reasonably conservative assumptions about portfolio returns and all the rest. So then the real issue you're left with is what do you do with the 10 plus, okay? And on the 10 plus, they made life decisions, they're in, you have an implicit contract here, and so my view is you basically whittle that down over time, but it doesn't get any worse. And the other thing you do is for everybody, you basically apply, you can't change the pension system without a 2/3 vote of the legislature, an actuarial analysis on what the value of the change is worth, and an identified revenue source to pay for it. Because one of the big problems we have is it's not really a defined benefit plan. You can change it with one line in a piece of legislation, and that happens far too infrequently.
What do you wanna raise the age to?
60.
60.
I'm 53, I figure 60.
Isn't it 60 for some groups, or?
I think it tops out at 55.
55, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's 30 years,
It's
right?
50, it's 50 for
Well, to
some
go up
groups.
to 80,
Yeah.
to go up to 80%.
Oh, and then, you know, judges have to
Yeah,
pay,
it
get rid of
depends on the
termination
level.
pensions, I mean, there's a whole bunch of other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but, okay.
Because there are some groups for 80%, they have to go, I think administrators and that
They
type,
can
they
go
have
up
to
to-
be older.
Like prison guards can go up at 80 with.
But yeah, prison guards, police officers,
Yeah.
firefighters, that type.
Well, on prison guards, my view would be if you got 10 years or more, the rules are gonna be as they are, because I don't.
Right.
Right.
But if you get less than 10,
Mhm.
new rules apply, same as they do to everybody else.
I know they are worried about whether or not the courts would strike that down, but
The 10 or less?
I think they have to do it for all new employees, but
Yeah,
I'd be willing to be challenged on that one. You can make, I believe, a credible argument that you have an implicit contract with somebody who's vested. I think if you haven't vested yet, I think it's pretty hard to argue
I
that.
think so too.
You know, you're on the hook for that.
and you want to cap it at 90,000, that's.
Right.
So that's,
But then
So do you think the governor- I mean,
university presidents.
the governor went with like, you're talking about over the course of your career, governor went with 5 years in his budget. He filed some increase in the retirement age in his budgets and pension reforms, but he took the pension commission recommendations of average of your top 5 years
No,
salary.
no. You know, I get out of my 401k as a private sector person what I put in, adjusted for return, whatever it happens to be. Pension system ought to work the same way. And the other thing is, there should be no benefit to gaming the system, right? The thing that bothers me the most about the way the pension system works now is if you just play by the rules, right? You don't do anything to, you know, artificially change anything associated with how you came in, what you did for work, or where you left. There are a lot of people who think you're kind of a chump, right? My view on this is, if you play by the rules, right, you should be no different at the end of the day than somebody else. And that to me is the biggest problem with the high 3, the high 5,
And the group jumping.
and the group jumping. I mean, you got 80% of the workforce in group 1, right? You got 60% of the retirees in group 1. How'd that happen? Now, the other thing we said, the two other things we said, just since you do seem to be interested in this, which is great. The way it works now is you don't get classified till you apply to retire, right?
Right.
So where you go out is fundamental to how you apply and how you get classified. We should be classifying everybody right now where they went out. I mean, where they are,
Where they
right?
are.
When they come in, they should get classified. Where they are, they should get classified. The state treasurer's office should have to issue a report every year that says, you know, these people are whoever gets changed with regard to where they're classified, there should be a report issued, name of the person, why they're being changed, why they're going from where to where. And that should be completely transparent, annual report. And I also think we ought to do a forensic audit of everybody who applied for retirement over the last 5 years and figure out how many of those people really went out at the level and in the group they should have gone out in.
Of course, you're gonna get bucked all the way up the system to change that. I mean, these things come in incrementally, these changes, you know?
I've talked to a lot of people.
And as
I've
soon
talked
as
to
the
union
economy-
people, I've talked to a lot of people about this, and they get it. I mean, they
Well,
understand
private
the
sector
math.
people get it, the public sector people, they think this is an entitlement. This is, you're talking about a major culture change. I mean,
Yeah.
I like to say it, the public servants have become the public masters. They rule, okay? To change something like this, there'd be mass demonstrations, they'll be calling their state reps and state senators, pulling their endorsements. Not that those endorsements mean anything.
Well, the way I'm looking at this is what I'm campaigning on, this is what I'm running on. If I win, okay, there'd be no reason for me to do anything other than full speed ahead.
Okay, we're gonna hold you, we get that on tape, we're gonna hold you to that, you know? Because the plunder just continues, no matter what. That's what it is. It's a.
Yeah, I mean, you
plunder
praise the
of
cities and
culture.
towns for, you know, doing their share and everything, but they really have, when it gets to the negotiation table, with the unions across the table, they really haven't, I don't know if they've done.
They lose an
And you know what gets me, every one of these town and city managers say, oh, they should have they should have these rights because, they're running a corporation, It's not a corporation.
No, it's not a corporation.
Municipal government's a
No,
bureaucracy.
hey, look,
No, it's not a corporation. You're running a
I've run a
corporation.
corporation, they're
Yeah.
different, all right? But I also worked 8 years in state government, so I understand, I spent 3 years as a member of my board of selectmen and 4 years on the board of ed, so I get the difference between a corporation and a public entity, and there are certainly things you do in a corporation you'd like to bring to the public sector, but they're different, they're really different.
It gets me with the local government, it can never go out of business. Your business could have gone out of business. If you made
Came
the right
like
decision.
this close to
Yeah,
going out of
right.
business.
They just raise taxes to keep themselves in business and drop down the pain.
Well, we also dealt with the fact that, people chose to be with Harvard Power, right? And they could choose not to be. And for a while there, when I first got there, a lot of them did choose to be with somebody else. I mean, we lost. We went from 1 million members to 750,000 members in about 18 months, okay? People were leaving. I mean, because the plan was in receivership, the building was on fire, and, blah, blah, blah. And if ever there was any doubt in my mind about the difference between the public sector and the private sector, it was pretty clear right there. Because people were voting with their feet, and they could have just kept voting with their feet. And we had to move unbelievably quickly to turn it around and fix it. Now it's back up to 1.1 million on the membership side. And that was a ton of hard work. But yeah, I know the difference between a corporation and a public entity.
Mm. Well, they always, they always whine, they want the legislature to pass a law, giving them flexibility on contracts because they are unable or unwilling, to show the courage at the bargaining table. And, if I was the town manager, city manager, and she's representing the union, I'm negotiating with her, and I'm supposed to be representing the public. But at the same time, I know that anything that he gets, I'm gonna get. Because if she gets 3%, me as the town manager, well, I say, gee, I should at least get 3%. So I'm really, I'm really negotiating for myself while I'm negotiating with the, with the union. I
But
mean,
you also
the
get
system is
pushback
game.
from the politicians who the
yeah.
unions support and vote into office. So
Absolutely.
then they're saying, just, you gotta give the guys something, you gotta give them something, so it's, and those are the people who hire you, so
Yeah.
it's very,
Yeah. No,
very difficult
I understand what you're
process.
saying. I do think that, the Romney administration actually proposed a set of municipal finance and governance reforms in sort of 2004, plus or minus, somewhere around in there. It was a pretty good bill. I don't know if you're up there then, I don't even think it got a hearing, okay? And I would love to sort of go back to something like, it was a good proposal. I mean, among other things, it said that, before a Board of Selectmen could sign, or a local governing body could sign off on a collective bargaining agreement, there had to be a third-party review and sign off on the financial expense associated with that collective bargaining agreement. Because one of the things that's happened historically is people have not necessarily known exactly what the price tag in years 2, 3, and 4 of those agreements are. And I think there's huge benefit to forcing, again, sort of more sunshine and transparency onto this stuff. It's like the pension stuff, I mean.
How do you beat that? I mean, you just mentioned a specific problem. Romney filed this, didn't even get a hearing. There's a lot of optimism out there, but there's also a very real possibility that Republicans lose seats in the legislature in this election.
Oh, I don't think that's gonna happen.
It's possible, given the number who aren't running for different offices.
There's some really
Well,
good
you
people.
might not.
There's some really
No.
good people who've jumped into some races.
Two?
Yeah,
Yeah, you got Scott Brown and
you
Richard
got
DeSantis.
Scott Brown,
Right.
you're running
Right.
mate.
Oh, I know.
Lou Evangelitis in the House is running for sheriff in Worcester.
Mhm.
Bob
Rep
Hargraves.
Perry is running for Delahunt's seat. He won't be running for
Bob
reelection.
Hargraves is running for
A
selectman.
net loss of seats?
I think there could be. I think potentially.
I think we're gonna,
No, I'm not saying that's, yeah, I
We've
think
got
that's
some-
good. But
we've got
even
some
if you
good
picked up,
people running
even
for
if
a
you picked
bunch
up
of
a
seats.
few,
yeah.
the numbers are small. This is a problem of even getting a hearing. How do you beat
But
that?
not all Democrats are as liberal as people make them out to be either. I mean, there's a lot of moderate conservative
Speaking of your
Democrats.
senator, for
I know.
example.
So,
Yeah. But unless Terry Murray and Bob DeLeo say this bill gets a hearing, then,
Yeah.
I think,
how do you work with that Democratic sort of establishment down there?
I get along, look, my mom's a Democrat, my dad's a Republican. I'm a mixed marriage kid. I grew up listening to the two of them you know, across the kitchen table the whole time I was a kid. And I went around and met with practically everybody in the legislature when I first joined state government. I went to their offices, I sat down and I talked to them, and I found out what they were interested in, what they cared about. And I had good working relationships with people over there, and we got a lot of stuff done, some of which was, I got people to vote to close facilities in their own district. I mean, I think it's a lot of work, and you have to be persistent and all the rest, but I don't think it's fair or reasonable for a governor to blame the legislature for his or her inability to get the job done. Part of your job as governor is to figure out how to work with the legislature no matter who's in it.
Oh, certainly, we've had Republican governors who had to work with Democratic majorities. Things get done. I mean, going back to the Wells Salucci years, I mean...
I learned a lot from watching him.
Yeah. Now, one thing that especially during these economic times, I mean, the privatization, which Wells started pushing way back and worked very well for a year or two before Senator Pacheco, you know, killed the whole effort and stuff. And that's one of the things where these town and city managers have their hands tied because they can't really, because of some of those restrictions that are still in state laws, you know, with privatization. Yet we've got a school.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah.
I know it's an issue at the state level, but I know a bunch of mayors who
No, there's a threshold.
use
There's a
the
threshold on.
Yeah, it is a problem.
Yeah, on 10,000, anything over, you know, it's gonna stay under $10,000, because, I mean, we've got a city manager here, he wants to fix the windows in City Hall, and it'd be twice as much to do it, because he's got estimates, they're over, you know, probably about $100,000, and he's gonna have to put it out into bid, and the PLAs and everything else.
Oh, that might be a prevailing wage issue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And we've got the, you know, the Lowell Public Schools right now looking into privatizing the lunch programs, and you know, there's all kinds of, you know, the unions putting pressure, we can't.
Oh, there's tremendous, look, I privatized, I outsourced food service, housekeeping, medication administration, mental health, process, network administration and claims processing, payment, all that kind of stuff. I did it with a bunch of different things when I was there before, and it's difficult and it's complicated, but in most of those cases, I thought we did the right thing. And if you look at sort of, you know, the stuff that we actually did contract out, it's still all contracted out. I mean, there's nothing that went the other way, which says to me that there must have been some rationale for doing it that way. I mean, in the case of some of this stuff, it was the way every organization of that kind dealt with those issues. And I think that ends up being part of the conversation too. I don't see how it can't be.
Turning to education, we just had this education reform that was passed.
Yep.
And what are your thoughts on that? Are you happy with that? Right now, we're questioning some of the standards was set in this race to the top. No one read the fine print, you know, and Massachusetts stands much higher than everybody else's, but we'd have to buy into 85% of the national program, and now we're getting you know, double speak from the Department of Education. Well, that doesn't, even though we only control 15% under this program, we can basically...
Still be enough to be saying they won't lower their standards, even though we have to buy into the federal standards, which right now are lower than what we currently have.
I said this right after the whole signing ceremony and all the rest. I said that I thought the hard part started now. That it's great that there was a framework that was created here, okay? But at the end of the day, whether we get anything out of this or not becomes a function of how enthusiastically people choose to pursue the opportunities associated with dealing with underperforming schools and charter expansion and all the rest. And that's, you know, that's going to be the hard part. That's always the hard part. You know, whenever you do something like this, you know, what you get out of the legislative reform is a framework, but execution, okay, that's really where you can either turn a good idea into a great idea or a good idea into a bad idea. And if you do a bad job implementing, then it almost doesn't matter what you did with the framework in the first place. And I think we have a long, I think the jury's out on that in terms of how that will all play out over the next few years. Separate and apart from the race to the top piece, I think in addition to that, just the whole, will those reforms create opportunities that communities, school committees, superintendents will be willing to chase with respect to their ability to improve their schools, yes or no? And I think that's a question mark. We'll have to wait and see.
Looking at that new reform that was enacted, is there anything in there or anything that isn't in there that you would have liked to have seen? Just looking at that, how would have you put your
No, I was happy. I was glad to see it happen. I was especially glad to see the cap on charter schools lifted, which I think is a huge problem. I was one of the people who started Pioneer Institute back in the 80s, and Pioneer was sort of the birth parent of the charter school movement. And for me, it was always about creating innovative models for educating kids in the cities. I mean, I always thought that, the suburbs, it's just different. I mean, it shows up in the test scores, it shows up in everything. The real action in education reform at this point is what are we going to do about the cities? How are we going to improve the scores of kids in the cities? And I think it's going to be through innovation and different models. It's not going to be through, doing the same thing we've been doing year over year over year. And there's a lot of research now that's coming out that says that the way you teach kids successfully varies from place to place. And I think that's going to be an important part of the conversation.
So if one community wanted to extend the school year for its public school students, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody has to.
Correct.
Hmm.
Exactly.
So that would be a local option.
In my mind, yeah.
Hmm.
But the process has always been to try to make it the same everywhere. And the one thing that's showing up in a lot of this education research is that that's not really the best way to think about this when you're talking about hard to reach populations. I got about 2 minutes and then I got to be in town by like 1:30.
What have we covered?
Although I'm really enjoying this.
Well, what do you think about the Attorney General's recent decision to file legislation against the constitutionality of the federal...
DOMA.
Yeah.
I don't, honest to God, I don't know anything about whether that's a worthwhile legal effort or not. I don't know anything about it. I'm a supporter of marriage generally, and I'm a supporter of gay marriage here in Massachusetts. I have personal family experience with that issue. My brother's gay, married, and lives in Massachusetts. But I know nothing about what the legal, I just don't know.
I don't know if she wanted to protect people who might be considering leaving the state,
Yeah.
I mean...
Yeah, because if you
think
get married here and you go somewhere else, then it's not, you have no rights.
But why worry
The
about
same
people?
rights.
Worry about people who are here. Why worry about people?
Oh, well, she raised two issues. One, because of federal law,
benefits.
because we allow it here, but because the federal law
Right.
doesn't acknowledge it. In cases like if a spouse requests to be buried in a military cemetery with their veteran spouse,
That would not
maybe
be
of
allowed.
same sex, they would not be allowed, and should the state go ahead and choose to allow them to be buried together, they can't get the federal reimbursement. And also the healthcare implications of if my partner were a state employee and I was on his state health insurance, they have to keep separate rolls for both of us because it's not taxable income for the state employee, but for the spouse, it has to be reported as taxable income. So the state has
Federal
had to,
tax
federal
policy.
tax, and the state has had to maintain two separate databases of people and track all that and pay Medicaid payroll taxes on those people, and it's cost. I mean, modest amounts of money, but.
I'm a big believer that right now we should be thinking and talking about jobs, budgets, spending, and taxes. That's what we should be focused on. And I love the report the AG did on healthcare. I would love to see her spend a lot of time promoting it, encouraging people to incorporate a lot of it into the larger policy discussions that need to take place there, because to me, that does fit into the jobs, budget, spending, and taxes question. But I don't know how you can have 9.5% calculated unemployment statewide, 15% in a lot of our counties around Massachusetts, and be focusing on anything at this point as a public official other than job, spending, taxes, and getting people back to work. I mean, the whole ball game should be about that. That's what everybody should be worried about all the time.
What about, also, you've received a lot of criticism about your unwillingness to acknowledge or not about climate change. Yet you're saying you support the investments in renewable energy.
You know,
the Globe wrote a whole editorial on that.
I learned an interesting lesson. I didn't know I was picking a fight on this one, okay?
Yeah.
And I said that to people afterwards. What I said was, I know the earth is getting warmer. I know man has something to do with it, but I don't know how much man has to do with it. But that doesn't matter, all right? Because at the end of the day, it's expensive to rely primarily on natural gas as our primary source of electricity, which floats with the price of oil, which gives us a cost per kilowatt hour that's 50% higher than the national average and 100% higher than what they pay in South Carolina, North Carolina, Texas, Florida, places like that. So I said, so, as good business practice, we should conserve, invest in energy efficiency wherever we can find it, try and create a smarter grid so that during peak periods we figure out how to use less and diversify our portfolio, which could mean biomass, wind, solar, hydro. And so I gave this big, long, lengthy answer and talked about the grid and how it works and peak and nuclear and how it all builds up and spot purchasing. And when I finished at the end of it, the person who asked the question said, so you're saying you don't believe that global warming is completely made by man? And I said, did you hear any of the rest of the stuff that I just said? And what I learned is that this is not an issue where you're allowed to pursue what I consider to be a perfectly appropriate diversification strategy, given who we are, where we are, and all the rest, if you don't buy into the big issue up front. And the problem I have with the big issue up front is there are a lot of really smart people who know a lot more about this issue than me who don't agree on it. So it's hard for me to then just say, okay. I mean, I like to think, frankly, that I'm, based on the way I was brought up, that there's usually two sides to every story, and I'm willing to pay attention to them. And on this one, what I concluded is even if there are two sides to the story, right, we'd be better off reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, just given how expensive it is and how unpredictable it is. And that's my position, which I still don't think that's particularly unreasonable, and I wasn't trying to pick a fight.
Sort of a carryover from the Scott Brown one.
Maybe.
It was an issue. I mean, that was a question that he kind of got, and then it kind of got pushed onto you, I think. Speaking of which.
Although, well.
You were oddly silent during the Scott Brown campaign. Was that a conscious decision not to get involved in his election?
No, I held 4 events for him.
Public events?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what was most interesting about them was they were all sort of fun and interesting, but they were, what I would describe as within the context of what I would have expected. Including one we had on January 6th where we had a good turnout and a good crowd, and it was very exciting, and I remember thinking, well, if we get 2 feet of snow on election day, I think he's got a shot, right? Because his vote's going to show up. And then we had one on the 12th in Salem, following, literally 6 days later, the day after the debate. And we thought we'd have a couple hundred people there, and 550 people showed up, and they were turning people away at the door. And I thought, oh my God, he might actually win. And then, of course, the last 14 days of the campaign were just crazy. But I'm a big believer in balance. I think balance is a good thing. I watched it growing up between my parents. I absolutely experienced it when I worked in state government. There's no doubt in my mind that my ability as a Republican to drag people into conversations they didn't want to have was a good thing, and vice versa. And Washington, I think, needs balance too. I mean, I don't I'm not one of these people who thinks that balance means gridlock. To me, balance means balance. And I think one-party rule, I don't care which party it is probably not a good thing. It breeds a certain level of arrogance and conceit that's bad for government.
Well, that's why usually the globe is always wrong, isn't it?
So you had four.
I did not say
No.
that.
Well,
Well, I shared the platform with other people.
Good
job.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Just seems like you would.
What was the Senate race? I mean, I wasn't gonna get in the middle of all that. I mean, people were saying to me, what about lawn signs and stuff? I said, guys, look, it's confusing enough out there as it is. Let's just, my race is in November and September of 2010, okay? Let's just let this one play itself out. I wasn't deliberately trying to do anything, to tell you the truth.
Right.
I mean,
Could have hitched your wagon with Scott Brown.
his bumper stickers on, my
F-150
bumper stickers on the back of his
pickup
truck.
Is it? Yeah.
Yes.
Actually, you're right.